Hello, this is Muho. Today is October 6th and the October 5-day session just ended yesterday and there was a strong typhoon passing by, but fortunately there was no big damage done. The construction where we had the rice to dry in the sun has fallen over, but fortunately we put the rice itself in a dry place by yesterday, so probably by tomorrow we can thresh the rice and harvest the third rice field tomorrow. Last month, before the session, I was asking myself the question, who am I? And posted that on YouTube, and I got a number of comments. And today I would like to answer to these comments. The first one here is by Stuart Mills. You are still inside Muho in the end because all the positions and perspectives are done by your brain. When you are the sky, you are activating some part of your brain that enables an overview of thoughts and emotions. When you decide to be the grass, other part of brain will take over. All these positions feel different, less attached to thoughts or carrying the thoughts, and it's possible to go even further to activate other areas of the brain and everything disappears. But it's all just your brain, your neuron connections, you, true you, enlightenment, emptiness, are chemical reactions in your brain that you activate in meditation. I like this point of view because in a way it's a very same point of view. And almost, in this scientific age it's also a common sense point of view. Consciousness is not something high up there in the sky, but it's actually my brain. Or maybe, standing on this point of view, we could even say that's not me having a brain, but the brain having me. Or it's not me having the body, but the body having me. Which is a pretty refreshing, I think, change of perspective. Not to say I have a body, but this body possesses a brain, and what I call myself, my consciousness, is actually nothing but a product of that brain, or the brain itself, as Stuart Mills seems to be suggesting. Still, there are problems, I think, that stay unresolved. For example, right now we are more than 20 people here in Antalya. So it's possible that a scientist would show me all of the brains, including my own brain. So there's 20 brains in a laboratory, and the scientist would say, one of these brains is your brain. Pick the right one. And I probably would have no clue which of these brains is my brain. But if the brain is consciousness, or if my consciousness is the brain, how come that I cannot identify the right brain? In the case of consciousness, it's not even possible to imagine how you would line up 20 consciousnesses. And even if you could, I would have no problem identifying my consciousness because it's obviously this. There can only be one consciousness, that's mine, and that's the one that's hearing this sound. That's my consciousness, and there can be no other consciousness. So there seems to be a difference there, that even when you would say, well, what's hearing that sound is just a brain. The obvious question back is, well, where is that brain? Where's that brain? It's just in my consciousness, isn't it? It's just in my consciousness, or it is my consciousness just as this sound. So rather than saying that the consciousness is a product of the brain, you could also say, well, the brain is a product of the consciousness, isn't it? So I'm not saying that Stuart is wrong here. Actually, I like this perspective a lot, but I doubt that it explains everything. It seems that our brain and the consciousness is on a different level. For example, a scientist takes me to the laboratory. There's these 20 brains, and he tells me, this is actually your brain. He shows me my brain. And that's your consciousness, he tells me. So when I'm looking at that brain, I'm supposed to look at my consciousness. But if I'm looking at my consciousness, when I'm looking at the brain, I should see a consciousness inside the consciousness. It's like when I'm looking in a mirror and there's a second mirror in there and another mirror, and it's an endless succession of mirrors. But that's not the case. If I look at my brain, I see only one thing, and that's a brain. I don't see any consciousness there. So why is that if my consciousness is nothing outside of the brain? Why don't I see my consciousness when I see a brain? Isn't that strange? Another question you might ask is, if the consciousness is the brain, how come that I'm conscious of only certain activities inside the brain, while other things, other parts of the brain stay unconscious? For example, I'm conscious of my thoughts, of decisions I'm making. I can become conscious of my breath if I choose so. But if I don't, I'm unconscious of my breath. And certain things I can't even become conscious, although I would like to become, like for example my digestion. The digestive process is always unconscious. Why? An obvious answer would be, well, because you don't need consciousness to digest food, while you need consciousness to make decisions, conscious decisions. But that answer only makes sense if you suppose that there's something like a free agent who is responsible for making decisions. While you don't need that free agent to digest. If you don't have that free agent, I don't see why you shouldn't be able to make decisions also completely unconscious. I don't see why we can't just function unconsciously, completely, 24 hours a day. So that has to do with the question of free will. If we have a free will, that would explain that sometimes we need consciousness to make the decisions, because only when we're conscious we can be free. But most people who identify consciousness with the brain actually negate free will. I think today you can hardly find a brain scientist or a philosopher, modern philosopher, that would say, well, we have a free will. Or when they say we have a free will, it means that our actions are in accord with our thinking. But that's not usually what we mean when we say free will. When we say we have a free will, there's some agent that can decide to do something in a way, but it could also have decided in a different way. But that's a position that hardly anyone takes today. So I would like to talk for some minutes about free will, my own position on free will. Do we have a free will or not? As I said, I'm pretty much attracted to the position that our consciousness is rooted in the brain. It's not something that's floating up there in the sky. Still, if next year, in 2017, a brain scientist would make a big discovery and would say we were wrong all the time. Actually, we finally found free will. We finally found the location of free will in the brain. I think I could live with that as well, because to be honest, my whole life I lived as if I had a free will. It's never that I could grasp that agent who's making decisions. I can never grasp the guy who's thinking. If you ask me who's speaking right now, who's the guy who's producing all those words, I couldn't give you an answer, but still at least it feels as if what I'm saying right now, I'm speaking to the camera. I say these words because I want to, and if I wanted to stop, I could stop anytime. It feels like that. So if somebody told me you have a free will, I can live with that, because actually my whole life I was pretending as if I was free and responsible for what I say. On the other hand, if in 2017 the brain scientist would say the opposite, we found the final proof that free will does not exist, I don't see how that would affect me either. Because if there's no free will, that means basically that all I did and said and thought until now, I did and said and thought because I had no other choice. Including the thought that I have a free